inviting me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you here. This is an opportunity for everyone at home and for people who might not know you to maybe get to know you a little bit better, understand some of your motivations, and learn a little bit about your policies that are going to be sort of carried with you through your journey toward the election. And so really, I just want to start this off a little bit with learning a little bit about you before we even start talking about any politics or anything like that.
Sure.
I saw something recently that was talking about, it was on the ACT government, I think it was their Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was posted in 2021, but they were talking about the fact that you had started at Woden Hospital in 1983 as I think it was doing filing in the X-ray department.
Yeah, that's true. I've had a long association with the Woden Hospital, which became the Canberra Hospital.
So you were a student at the time, or?
Yeah, it was a student holiday job.
Okay.
I went to the basement and pulled out all of the X-ray files, because X-rays used to be made of silver, and so when they were older than 7 years, then they were sold back to manufacturers for money, and they got silver out of them.
So they recycled those X-rays, did they? So you were already involved with renewables.
Look, in 1983, circular economy, but that's completely correct.
Recycling silver. So I think in that same post they were talking about in 1991 you started as a medical intern. Which hospital was that as well? Sorry, I'm drawing on.
Sure. I did my degree in Sydney. There was no A&U medical school at that time.
Okay.
I worked in Sydney for a year, and then I moved back to Canberra, and so I was employed as a resident. And at that point, both of that was the same network. So I was started at the Old Royal.
Yeah.
On the peninsula in Lake.
For those of us who, I was born in 1991, so the year that you started as a medical intern, you could have easily delivered me.
Well, I was working in paediatrics at the time, so
there you go. You could have easily delivered me. The Royal was which hospital? Where was that in Canberra? Was that at Canberra Hospital or?
It was the Royal Canberra. It was on the lake.
Oh, there you go.
Where the Museum of Australia is now.
Oh, there you go. Okay, news to me. So that's probably.
In fact, I'd been born in the Royal, some years, I think.
Oh, there you go.
I worked with a woman who had looked after me in the neonatal intensive care unit.
Wow, full cycle. So, if it's 1983, you were working, doing the little Christmas job, doing with the X-ray filing.
X-ray cutting.
That puts it at what, 39 years. If you consider the beginning of your career from there.
I guess so. I haven't really.
So
it's slightly disturbing, isn't it? The world turns.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
It's a long time to be working in, public health institutions. It obviously, speaks to your experience. The fact that
I haven't been in Canberra the whole time. I came back. I worked in Canberra for a few years, and then probably about 4 or 5 years, and then I spent some time working in regional Australia. So I was out in the Murray Irrigation area for a little bit, worked up in the north coast of Queensland, and then I got off to the UK, and I was working in Oxfordshire and at the John Radcliffe, which is the teaching hospital in Oxford, on and off for about 2 years.
And was that public hospitals as well?
They're all public hospitals.
Hospitals. So basically the sphere of public health has been your domain for...
Public acute hospitals.
Hospitals. Okay, that's interesting.
A little bit of work in the private, not huge.
Not a huge amount. So when was it, just pure curiosity, in all of that time, they say certain things about mastery, that you need 10,000 hours, yada, yada, yada.
All right.
Is there a point in overall this time that you felt like you came into your own as a doctor, or was it just this learning process that was from day one and just infinitely from there?
I remember very clearly on the first day at Prince Henry in Sydney, where the HR woman was behind us and said, "Now, doctors," and everybody's going, "What's she talking about?"
The title had absorbed itself in you.
Yes. And it was probably about, it was probably only 3 months before I no longer startled when people called me doctor.
Yeah, right. Okay. So 3 months was the transition
to accepting that that's what they meant, and probably about, I'd be thinking at least 5 years before. Yeah, 5 to 6 years before I was sort of more or less starting to get a sense that I vaguely knew what this meant.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's good to know that history. It's good to know that you were born in Canberra. I mean, I had assumed that you were born elsewhere, but that's great.
No. My grandfather came to Canberra in 1928
Oh, there you go.
to work on the original construction of the first Parliament House.
There you go.
Dad was born in Queanbeyan because my grandmother refused to live in a tent, so they actually lived in Queanbeyan until there was a house they could move into.
Wow, that's amazing. So the original Parliament House, that was your grandfather?
He was involved in working on that.
Oh, wow. That's
He
amazing.
was an interesting guy. He ended up working, and I think he retired as head of the maintenance unit at the facility services, whatever it was called, at the old Parliament House. And as part of his retirement, they decided they'd make a little presentation and talk about his early training, and it emerged that he probably didn't actually have any official trade documents, but he was able to do the job.
Yeah, I think that was fairly common back then. I think I definitely think that probably wouldn't have been out of the ordinary.
Mm.
So this is a good segue, since we're talking about history with 1928 and your grandfather. Let's now jump over to just to begin to softly speak about politics. So one of your, or at least let's call it the leading language or the leading principle that you have been using this time around, because obviously you've run before. This is your second time running, correct? Yep. And you did very well in the previous election.
Yeah, so people told me.
So people told you, but I think they weren't expecting you to do as well as you did.
That seemed fairly clear.
Yeah.
It was quite an interesting experience because I was completely naive, but I got absolutely no mainstream media coverage until after the election, when they said, "Oh, you got 11% of the vote or something." Tell us all about that. And I'm going, well, perhaps if you'd asked me before, I might have got a bit more.
Well, it's one of those things, isn't it? People are interested when you're what's the word for it? When you're producing something, or you're in the lead or winning, let's call it. Anyway, regardless, you did better than people expected.
Yes.
And this time around, you're obviously running again, because obviously there was a response that people were interested in what you had to say. There was obviously some belief that you were providing an alternative to the major parties, and presumably that's where these people came from. There were voters from major parties who moved their vote over to you. So the lead language that you're running with this time is "Tomorrow Matters," and I just want to, if you don't mind, I'd like to unpack that a little bit.
Sure. Because
the phrase "tomorrow matters" seems a little bit self-evident. Do you know what I mean? Surely everyone would think that tomorrow matters. So could you explain to us a little bit about why that choice of language?
I think one of the things that bugs me is I had a belief that governments were supposed to one of the roles of our government was sort of like strategic planning. I think Alan Cole has commented that CEOs of most organisations and corporate boards spend about half of their time looking forward and managing risk management. And particularly the last 2 years, I see no evidence that our current federal government has any involvement in strategic planning or looking forward to see what might be happening. Who could have foreseen that? We just didn't expect that there'd be any floods in northern rivers, New South Wales, South East Queensland. Although that we've been told
a well-known flood plan,
indeed, an area that floods regularly, that we've been the CSIRO, when it had a functional climate science thing, had been telling us was going to be a problem that the federal cabinet was briefed about in October last year. This is going to highly likely to be a problem by the Bureau of Meteorology, but somehow we just didn't realise that it would. Or when you said it was a problem, so this lack of engagement with what seems to be coming over the horizon. I think tomorrow matters. The other thing I think too, a lot of the decisions that they seem to be making seem to me to be really short term, and there's definitely people I've met who kind of feel that, you're here and then you die, and the person who gets the most toys wins, and that's the way I live my life. And that's a worldview that people hold. That's not one that works for me.
Yeah. So just a little bit further to that point as well, when you're talking about because in my mind, from you saying that there's two layers to that. There's the layer of mismanagement, which is innocent, to some degree. I mean, not innocent for our politicians because we expect them to manage things, but
well, I think we do. I think that's one of the questions of this election. Do we want a government that holds hoses, or do we want a government that just thinks it's out of your you need your government out of your life, and we'll just collect some taxes and fund the Defence Force with it? Do you hold the hose? Do you provide the hose? Do you pay the people who are holding the hoses? What do we actually want?
Yeah. So there's there's that planning aspect to it. But do you think there's as well? Is there an aspect to it? I mean, with the phrase that tomorrow matters, is there also, when you're talking about people who are what was the phrase you used? Sort of buying as many toys and then passing away with their toys, and they consider that to be winning in life. Let's call it. Is there a bigger problem as well with people who are politicians who are basically, I don't want to just call them career politicians, but people who are invested in...
Well, we can call them career politicians.
I suppose we can.
We can, but 40% of our political representatives are ex-political staffers. It's their career in politics and staying in there, and I think that's a problem.
And so for them, I suppose the issue is with career politicians is that they tend to... Their decision making is a little bit skewed by the fact that there is a self-motivated goal which probably takes priority over the actual priorities of the country.
Well,
but surely these people care about tomorrow. I mean, have you seen what has motivated you to come up with that?
I don't think so. Well, Barnaby Joyce, Michael McCormack, Tony Abbott, I think, were on record as saying that they didn't really care much about what happened after they died. I think Barnaby last month, maybe it was the month before, said, well, not very many of us are going to be here in 20 years' time. Okay, maybe he said 30. But again, it's a short-term focus, and I don't care after that.
Yeah, which is a much, I think...
And that's not a position, that's not where I'm at.
No, and I think that's probably a much larger problem than the planning problem. I mean, the planning problem can, to some degree, of course, the results sometimes look the same, but the planning problem is something which can be solved with good thinking, whereas the moral problem, if we could call it that, the moral problem of thinking, well, I'm not going to be here tomorrow, so I'll just,
so
it's for someone else to deal with.
To be occupying a seat and be paid this money. But I don't have to do anything except ensure that I'm continuing to occupy the seat and pay this money.
Yeah, which is So that's basically the underpinning motivation for that phrase. Tomorrow matters.
Well, I think
Okay.
I think our actions today do impact on our futures. Just generally in life, I think we have some personal responsibility for that, and. I think it's a particular time in our country's development.
Yeah. This is another good segue across to just to touch lightly on the climate issue, to get an overview of your perspective on those matters, and I just wanted to talk about when we tend to have conversations about climate as a country, and when we're talking about climate policy. People tend to like goals. They tend to like people to set dates, to set percentages, and all the rest of it. I suppose my question is, are climate goals still relevant? As in, do they mean anything anymore? Because often these goals will be set. They'll be set at 2020, 2030, 2040, whatever it is. They're not achieved, they're pushed backwards, etc., etc. Does it mean anything anymore for a politician to state these climate goals?
Look, I think this touches into another area where I think we've got a problem. I think one of the strengths, what has made Australia a good place to live in, and one of the things historically is that we have had some buy-in to an idea that there is a bit of external rationality, that there's some, we can examine the world, that science can help us in some way to understand what's going on. And, from that perspective, it doesn't matter whether Australia is the highest or lowest carbon dioxide producer per capita. The planet doesn't care. The atmospheric content of carbon dioxide doesn't matter where it came from, how many, it's just...
Who's signed what?
If it's going up, that's a problem. I think, Angus McIntosh's, it was Angus McIntosh, Andrew McIntosh's, was the former head of the carbon exchange system, emissions trading fund, and he's gone on the record in the last sort of month or so to say that 80% of this stuff is meaningless. 70 to 80% of the stuff of the system that we've set up hasn't actually resulted in that we're paying money for something that hasn't actually resulted in any reduction in carbon.
So surely that would shake public confidence in the issue as a whole, right? Because
it gets back to what is the point? Is your intention to do something about reducing carbon dioxide, the drivers of climate change, or is your intention to look like you've done something, produce a glossy brochure, and settle people down?
Yeah, and just
and if your intention is that it doesn't matter what happens after I've gone. Judith Lucy was on the other a month or so, probably 6 months ago now, just suggesting that, well, really, I'm 55, and as long as I can get some nice Chardonnay and lamb for what is something red, so Pinot Noir and the lamb for the next sort of 15 years or
That's
so,
all that
and that'll be me out.
Yeah.
The climate scientist she was talking to didn't really know how to handle that. My suggestion would be, well, Judith, we've had the bushfires, that does it's burnt out a whole lot of the Pinot vineyards, and the little lammies, there's no grass to eat. So I think even on that perspective, it's not going to work for you.
Yeah. I mean, with these climate targets as well, I'll share with you a little story, and I know this may not be relevant, but I think it speaks to the way that people tend to think about these things when they hear dates like 2030, 2040, etc., which these climate goals are usually associated with.
Yeah.
We recently moved houses here in Canberra, moved to a new suburb. The house didn't have any bins, right? Simple task of ordering bins, no problem. Call up, my wife did it, I can call, but my wife called or emailed or whatever it was, organised for bins to arrive. The bins didn't arrive for 3 months, right?
Yes.
That's a very long time to wait for your bins from a local, a local provider. But the point of that is, how, if local groups can't, if local government can't organise for bins to arrive at new buildings, how could your average person have confidence in targets which are set 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? How can we guarantee any kind of consistency if there is switching governments, if there's people being ousted and all the rest of it? Does this whole conversation need to change? Do we need to move away from lofty decade-long goals?
So I think rather than specifying a goal, the more important thing is to specify an intent, and then a mechanism of how you're going to get there. And then there needs to be actual some sort of penalty for failing to deliver. So you actually need to have a carrot as well as a stick. And the planet's survival the survival of our the continuing function of our current ecosystems 30 years hence doesn't seem to be a big enough stick for a number of our people with levers on the move, who've got the levers of power in their hands at the moment. So there needs to be a stick. The point that you're speaking to is Zali Steele's argument that there needs to be a completely depoliticised climate authority that is tasked with delivering established goals.
Would you support something like that? Sort of a
yeah.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. Just to cover as well, like for example, Labor says that 82% renewables by 2030. That they'll commit $700 million to upgrade the Snowy Hydro to make green hydrogen energy, which I think your average person doesn't even have any relationship to.
What is this
green hydrogen yet? So
is it the same as blue hydrogen? Does it come in
exactly?
Does it come with glitter?
From my perspective, often a lot of these climate conversations just feel like they would be lost. I mean, they're lost on me. They're probably lost on most other people because I'm a fairly average person. So I think that I'm a good sort of measurement for the wider population. So it doesn't feel like that these conversations are necessarily speaking to people where they hear them. You know what I mean? So it seems to me that it would be best not to complexify it further by adding necessarily a political tone to everything, and to instead talk about necessity, as you were saying, that it doesn't matter where the carbon is coming from, it's got to be dealt with, and some kind of, I suppose, a mediation between, technology, the negotiation between parties, and maybe even the moralization. How do you feel about the moralization of climate issues? Is that something that, I mean, obviously you feel strongly on the subject, so you would have your own perspective on what other people ought to be doing in terms of good and bad. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, it's common that politicians announce that Australians want. I think, Australians want, what Australians want is to be comfortable and continue to enjoy their existing standard of living with the same sort of effort, and to have a bit of a barbecue on, everything's, in my sort of medical job, in my sort of former medical job, I had a lot of conversations with people where it was clear to me that what they wanted and what they'd got were not were not at all the same sort of things.
Didn't match up.
Yeah. I don't know what other people should do. It's not my job to tell other people what they should do. If what you want is, as good a life as you can get out of whatever you can get for the next 10 years, and then when it all burns down, then that's fine, because you're here for a short time and a good time, then, well, that's what you want. That's not a position that, that's not, I prefer to hand things on in the best space we can, having left us just footprints on the grass.
Right.
And I don't think we're going to achieve that. This is where perhaps I differ from some of the other independents. A couple of the other teal independents who I've sort of listened to some of their podcasts. We really want to hand the planet on in a better condition than it is. Well, that's a nice idea, but I don't think that's going to happen.
You don't think that's likely?
Not in my generation. No.
It's not a realistic goal to have.
No. If we manage to turn this around, I think it's 4 generations. It's taken us 200 years to get here. If we manage to put the brakes on it and turn it around, I think we're looking at 4 generations to.
Would you consider yourself a realist?
Yes, I'm often accused of being cynical, and so my justification, my response is, well, I'm just realistic.
Yeah. Which I suppose.
But I think is important. I think one of the things about trust in politics, or trust in general, if people only ever tell you, positive spin or stuff they think you want to hear, and then people end up, particularly when it doesn't pan out that way, then you're not trustworthy.
Which is an issue that we have had repeatedly with Australian politics, is politicians will tend to give the public a best case scenario. They will dress things up.
They tell them what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And that's...
Well, is it what they want to hear, or they say what they need to say in order to get in, again, because it's the career politician problem?
Partly the career politician problem. And we've set this thing up where, we won't... the public tends... vested interest. Well, if we're going to have to change stuff, then we'll have to change what we've been doing. And the biggest single barrier to us changing is that people don't want to give up what they've already got. Organisations who've, the mining industry, which is getting at tax concessions for running its fuel, for burning its fuel to dig up more coal to burn that. They don't want to give that up. Because they've already got it.
And on that point, actually, so I just wanted to read off a few on the point of the sort of the mining industry of Australia, and the fact that you were talking about, really, I think what the average person often fears with the climate, I don't want to call it a movement, but the climate problem, let's call it. Dr. Brian Fisher, before the 2019 election, wrote a report which suggested that switching Australia over to green energy would cost somewhere between 264 and 500 and something billion dollars. That's a huge cost. Now, Brian Fisher since then has been known,
So let us just put that in perspective. Assuming that Dr. Brian Fisher, who I'm not familiar with, but assuming that he's accurate in his costings, we have spent on the coronavirus pandemic supplements, we've gone into debt to about $800 billion. And a lot of that has been I would suggest a lot of that has been corporate welfare handouts that were completely unnecessary.
I think in this report that he wrote, I think this was every year our total gross output. This would be, a reduction, a yearly reduction rather than a one-off cost. But I should stipulate as well, as you say, that I know professors from the ANU have since said that his estimate of those costs has been completely overblown. He's known to work for the Minerals Council of Australia, etc. Sorry. Can I just say, I just want to get to the crux of this point.
Yep.
Do you believe it's possible to achieve a transition to green energy where the average Australian doesn't feel afraid, or do we need to take a loss in order to make this transition happen, or is it possible to keep growth, to stay steady and switch over to green energy somehow? I'm talking about the complete replacement.
Yeah.
Or is a loss inevitable, and the Australian public has to get used to the idea of taking the loss in order to be able to move forward?
I don't have an informed perspective on that. I work in emergency medicine, where the mantra of the college is what is the worst possible thing that could happen and how are we going to mitigate that.
Okay.
I've often had conversations with people where, look, if I told you you're going to write your car off and break your leg this morning at 9 o'clock, you wouldn't have felt it was lucky. But given that here we are now, geez, you're lucky. This sort of biases my perspective. I think it seems unlikely to me that we will absolutely guarantee that we'll make a profit and it'll be a great economic opportunity, and there will be nothing that we'll be giving up as part of this transition. I think if we don't make the transition, then we'll be giving it all up anyway.
There are definitely some people who think that it'll be very profitable for Australia.
There are.
Australia,
and also the opportunities for some people to make profit.
Yeah, of course. As with all things, soon as as soon as the system goes through a state of change, certain things go down, certain things come up, etc., etc. So I think some estimates of that, the other side of the fence of the boom that green energy would bring is that Australia's total green energy potential is like 500 times what is currently being produced by fossil fuels. That just processing, using that green energy to just process a small portion of the ores and minerals that we pull out of the ground would net us, more wealth than our current iron and aluminium exports, and everything else.
But there's certainly very rosy, optimistic projections. I guess, have you ever done a house renovation?
Small ones?
Yeah.
Not a huge one.
I've done a medium-sized, partner and I have done a medium-sized house renovation. There's what the builder says it'll cost.
Yeah.
And then there's what it's costed.
Yeah.
And once we've taken the roof off, then, you just have to keep going, don't you, really? So, there are very few projects, although my father was involved in the management of the new Parliament House, and in fact, the cost for that, accounting for inflation, came in on budget, but it's common for large projects to hit unforeseen snags. I don't know what it's going to cost. It seems clear to me that if we don't do anything, then that's going to cost a lot. And so there's that. I guess the other thing that just came to my mind as you were speaking about Brian Fisher being on the Minerals Council of Australia, I think mining is a fundamental part of our economy. I think there's value in distinguishing between mining and fossil fuels.
Definitely.
Australia is a commodities exporter and is likely to remain a significant part of our economy. And it's just that this particular commodity is poisonous and we need to be winding it down.
Yeah.
Coal's been a great thing for our society. I think that the reason the coal and the development of coal technology by the British is largely responsible for the end of slavery. Prior to coal, then, we had humans, and so you owned some, and then you made them work. It was coal. It was the provision of coal and the technology associated with that ended slavery and has lifted, big chunks of the population out of poverty. But we can.
And hopefully because people decided to. I'll put an end to slavery, that too.
So one can decide to do many things, but if there's no alternative, it's because people don't want to give up what they've already got.
Yeah, and coal to some degree, of course, has been a natural part of developing nations, and I can't remember where I heard it, but the fact that all nations are developing nations is just a question of
where you are on curve.
where you are on an unknown curve, you know what I mean?
And again, there's stuff, we rolled out miles and miles of copper wire to have a telephone system.
Which is now being superseded by satellites.
Many developing nations have completely leapfrogged that era of telecommunications.
Yeah.
It's gone to mobile phones. So just because it was necessary for the first ones doesn't mean that it's necessary for everybody.
So I suppose the point of that question though is, do you consider green energy for Australia to be a profitable endeavour? Would it be or you're not concerned with that? You're not necessarily concerned with whether it will be profitable. You just know that it will. The loss is what motivates you. That you know it will cost us a lot if we don't deal with it, because the roof is leaking basically. We have to change the roof.
I think the idea that the only reason we should do anything is because it's profitable. That's I've certainly met people, and that's the only reason they do anything, because it's going to make them money.
Well, a lot of people think in those terms. A lot of people, I think, are concerned that it will not be profitable, and the problem is that it will crash the transition to green energy will crash the economy somehow. I think that's a fear that many people have.
I think it is probable that the economy will, failing to do it, the coal is not going to continue to be a saleable option. In perpetuity.
So I understand it's not necessarily a question of whether green energy.
So for me, the issue is not so much that we can make mountains of money for it, so it's a great economic opportunity and we should do it. It's just do it or if you want to live on a continually degrading planet, then then that's fine. Don't do anything. If you don't care because you're going to be dead, then that's your prerogative.
Good for you, but not. That's not
the way you think.
Yeah. I understand. So, having said all of this, I mean, it's obvious.
Volodymyr Zelensky, the current president of the Ukraine, apparently had a phrase during his acceptance speech of the presidency, which is, I don't want a photo of me on your office wall. I'm the president. I'm not an icon. Or, if you're going to make a decision, look at photos of your kids.
That's good. That's some good wisdom. Yeah.
So I'd be close to that perspective.
So beyond the obvious of the fact that it's a pleasure to be able to speak with somebody who is running for Parliament and to speak in such a sincere and straightforward way that isn't necessarily gilded in a bunch of political, let's call it, just what's the word?
That was my mark. There's a bit of a journey from I work in emergency medicine and everything's fine to I work in emergency medicine and we do seem to, I'm a doctor and we seem to have a bit of a problem, the government's not doing so great. And then, gee, these guys are bad, anybody'd be better. Jeez, maybe I'd be better.
Maybe you should stick up your hand.
But, Karen Phelps on her acceptance speech, whatever you think about Karen Phelps, but at the doorstop, she answered the question. Tony Burke didn't answer the question, he provided 3 political speaking points.
So to me, that's an obvious reason why somebody would be invested in voting for you versus, voting for a let's just call them an existing political party. Is that much of that world has become very tired. It doesn't seem to speak.
It's completely disconnected from most people's reality.
Doesn't speak honestly anymore. It doesn't even speak clearly. Sometimes I will hear politicians say things where I'm not even sure what they've said.
I don't think they know what they've said.
Yeah, and I wonder sometimes whether they do know what they're saying or whether they sort of just have a bunch of political jargon that just sort of bounces around in their heads, and they just sort of like Lego do a mix match, just connect it all together and then string it out and hope that means something.
One of my colleagues had words bingo.
Yeah, exactly. It's my understanding as well that you don't receive any donations off of...
No. It's a choice. Well, why? But, no, I'm funding this myself. There's always a question about where the money's coming from. I funded this myself. Last time round, a relative had died and left me some money as a bequest. This time round, as part of my resignation, they paid out my long service leave. You know.
There you go. So the phrase "you're putting your money where your mouth is
Yeah.
pretty on point with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Which brings us over, I guess, to another core component of your platform, or if you can call it a platform, because you just won there. You don't necessarily have a platform, but the anti-corruption problem, the problem of
Let's call that. I prefer to try and phrase it positively. Let's talk about integrity.
integrity. Sure. Let's talk about political integrity.
Yeah. What does that mean? Yeah.
And on the topic of donations and external groups having a vested interest in politics, what sort of brought your attention to this as being a issue that you wanted to sort of directly address? Because I know other politicians are addressing it, but they do it in a sort of wish-washy...
Look, so this has been... I flagged it as a concern last time, and I wasn't the only person. Federal ICAC was one of the public signs last time.
Because that gets thrown around a little... That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Many politicians will talk about federal ICAC.
Sure.
I'm not sure.
Sure. So both the Labor and the coalition groups endorsed this within it as part of their pre-election or immediately post-election wind-up. And 3 years later, they have failed to deliver anything and have in fact shut the discussion down. So, practically speaking, in terms of what you might do, the Parliament passes laws, and there, Helen Haynes, who's the independent from Indi, Cathy McGowan had initially flagged that Helen Haynes and her groups continue to do a body of work on it. The legislation is written, it's been reviewed by former Supreme Court judges, it's been reviewed by police unions, it's been reviewed by anybody who has any expertise or perspective on this matter, and they're over 100 people with significant understanding of how these things work has signed off on it. The only people who aren't interested in passing it are the politicians of the major parties.
Which should probably concern...
I think it tells
should
you
probably
something.
concern a lot of people.
It says something. It's not just too hard. It's been too difficult. And there's recurring themes. There's plastic bags of money in Chinese restaurants. There's who's paid millions of dollars to. There's the blind trust. You just trust me. Take it on blind trust. And that's not a problem because it's not. It was within the law, within the guidelines, because it had never occurred to anybody who wrote the guidelines that you'd stand up and announce that you were taking $1 million from someone who you didn't know who it was and was in a blind trust.
Yeah. So essentially, what you're saying is that the sort of mechanisms to enact a federal level anti-corruption commission have been put in place.
No, they haven't been put in place. But they've been...
We conceptualised.
We know what they are, and not just as a thought bubble. There's the actual detail. It would cost this much. You'd fund it like this. You'd set it up like this. You'd run it like that.
Yeah, so the mechanism is ready.
Yeah.
So what it really needs is votes in Parliament.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is that if people vote for you, you're going to put your hand up for that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's
corruption. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, Jamie, I believe you, because again, you're funding it with your own money, so I don't think there's an external force pulling your strings to get you invested in that topic. But that's good. I think it's good for a little bit of clarity on that, because it is one of those issues that like I said, floats around, comes out of the mouths of all sorts of people, but is always...
I think there's kind of value also in just fleshing out a little bit more what it is. So one of the comments that significant politicians have said last time in terms of criticising the New South Wales ICAC, nobody's ever been convicted by the ICAC. No, it's an investigative organisation that doesn't provide convictions. That's somebody
criminal
else's,
convictions.
That's somebody else's
criminal
job. Yeah. The other thing is that things can be corrupt even if they're not criminal. So, if you're running a business, and you've got a business, you run your business, it's your business, it's your money. If you decide that you want to employ, cousin Maria because she's a bit down on her luck, even though she's pretty useless at the job, that's entirely your lookout because it's your business. If we have given our taxpayers' money to the government, to the Commonwealth government, and then we have a belief, I have a belief, it's been a convention of Australian political systems. This is the difference, the Australian political system has had as a convention that what we're supposed to do, what the government is supposed to do, is find the best person for the job, not give it to Cousin Maria. There are other systems of government where if you're in power, then you give it to Cousin Maria, because that's what happens. That hasn't been, historically that's always happened to some extent, I'm sure, but it hasn't been.
I mean, the money to employ Cousin Maria didn't come from nowhere, like you're saying. It's your money, it's my money. We expect it to be.
So if you're
responsible.
running your own business and it's your money, you can employ who you like. But there's been a convention in the Australian system that if you're in the Australian system of government, that if you are entrusted with dispersing public funds, then you don't give it to Cousin Maria. And in fact, you don't give it to Cousin Maria. If it turns out that Cousin Maria is in fact one of the top 3 contenders, then you take yourself out of the decision. I mean, this is the Gladys Berejiklian thing. I'm just going to, my boyfriend Daryl, he'd like a hospital in Wagga, so we'll just give $140 million to Wagga, and maybe Wagga needed a hospital, and maybe Wagga was in fact first in line for hospital compared to the rest of New South Wales.
But even if that is the case,
but
you take
if
the
it's your
process.
boyfriend Daryl, you take it out.
Yeah.
And
so
the guys don't get this. Barnaby Joyce's statement, is on record as saying, well, if Gladys Berejiklian is corrupt, we all are. Yes, Barnaby, you are. Yes. That'd be it. That would be the issue.
So this, I mean,
I'll do one other. So in the last election, the Liberal guys, they were a bit concerned that their messaging wasn't coming through. And so Tim Wilson was the chair of the Economic Review Committee of the House of Reps. And the Economic Review Committee, there's a thing where if the government's instituted a policy and they've made some policy changes and they want to find out how it's planning out, then a politician and a secretary can cruise around the countryside and chat to a few people about how it's working and what's happening for them. So what Tim Wilson, in agreement with Scott Morrison, it was reported in the Herald by Michael Koziel, the Sydney Morning Herald, that what Tim Wilson and supported by Matthias Cormann and Scott Morrison decided to do was to go out on a bit of a fact-finding mission around the country about what people might have thought about a Labor policy that hadn't existed yet. So this wasn't the government exploring what had actually happened. This was the Liberal Party finding out what people might have thought about
opposition's
about
future
potential policy. And not only that, but you get to put in, are asked to put in written thoughts about this. So Tim drafted some, and he handed them out to people at these meetings. So a quarter of the submissions that the thing received, Tim had actually drafted. And Tim, provided if people were concerned or agitated about this or needed some more financial advice, he provided some contact details, which was his cousins who ran a financial investment device. Right. And so this is Tim, who had a position as a public official where he was empowered, required to go and find out what was happening. And he used that mechanism to find out, to beat up hysteria or to raise concerns about a political opposition's possible policies. He wrote the submissions and he provided the contact detail and he advertised for his cousin. This is corrupt.
It's a total misuse.
This is corrupt. It's not illegal. It wasn't actually illegal and nothing happened. This is not where we were when I was a kid, mate. One of the which one was it? One of the prime ministers. His wife went on TV advertising curtains for Cusacks. And he was almost obliged to resign over this misuse of this sort of association of a major public...
And his wife was not a politician?
No.
Merely the fact that she was associated with
as the Prime Minister's wife, she used her position as Prime Minister's wife to advertise curtains for Cusacks. And this was enough of a scandal. Michael Woolridge, I think, former Minister for Health, resigned because he imported a colour television, like he brought in a colour television in his hand and didn't fill in the customs paperwork, and this was, a problem. Tim Wilson cruised about the countryside advertising, gathering business through his cousin. And
so what you're referring to there is that you believe there's been a drift that we have had a standard or an expectation for our politicians in the past, and since that time we have majorly drifted to the point now where when people are in public office and they're supposed to be travelling the country completing a public service, they're using it as a means to advertise for their friends, family.
Well, certainly in that instance.
That's
what happened. And there was no consequence. So that gets back to the other thing. So, I did medicine first, and then I've spent my career in critical care medicine. But in that, I've had a significant staff training and management role. And I became interested in, and I also became interested in stress and stress management, normal people, how does that work? So I did a psychology degree with a focus on leadership and social psych. And if human behaviour, science suggests that for human behaviour, if there is no consequence, then the standards gradually unravel. People do what they can get away with. And the fringe, the edge, the leading edge will do what it can get away with. And if it gets a bit of a wallop, then it'll put itself back in line and the rest won't follow. And if everybody else sees that you do this and nothing happens, then, everybody, that's where it goes.
And what you're essentially saying too is that the line sometimes is quite thick and ambiguous between, when you're talking about anti-corruption, you're not talking about criminal, that we're necessarily...
Corruption may be criminal,
but not all corruption is criminal.
But Gladys Berejiklian, as Premier of New South Wales, is, delegated from the Crown to spend the money of the government.
Yeah.
She, the thing is not that she didn't have the authority to spend the money of the government. I mean, that's the question about Bridget McKenzie. Did Bridget McKenzie have the authority to actually spend the sports rights money? The answer is possibly no. But nobody argues that Gladys has... So Bridget may have committed a crime. Nobody's arguing that Gladys has committed a crime. It's just that, she appears to have been making the decision based on what her boyfriend wanted, not, what was going to deliver the best outcome for the people of New South Wales.
So really for being, and in saying that speaks to me more about the word integrity necessarily than we talk about crime and corruption.
Yeah.
But really for being, you're as a candidate, you want to inspire, the people of being or your electorate to raise their standards or demand a raising of the standards of integrity before we even talk about criminality, before we even talk about corruption. That as a public, as all of us together, we should have a greater appetite for the integrity that comes from our politicians. That they should be aware that the money that they play with and spend and all the rest of it is not, doesn't grow off a tree somewhere or the rest of it. It's obviously public money. They have a responsibility on behalf of all of us to manage it in a way that is...
And part of the other challenge for these guys, I think, who've been in there for like 20 years in those roles, just going back to my house renovation. And, when we first started then, Karen and I went to Bunnings and, we're really pleased that we found some tiles that, were 30% off and we just buy them and weren't quite sure where we'd put them. And, by the time we're sort of halfway through, then sort of going, what, you mean only 5,000? Oh, we'll have three. But you just become, the relentless sort of, you're going to have to spend this much, you're going to have to spend this much. So for those guys, for Josh Frydenberg, Matthias Cormann when he was there, they're sitting up there, Gladys Berejiklian. Look, it's okay, I've got you 140 million. That's fine, don't worry about it. Done, tick, move on.
Yeah.
No consideration around what 140 million actually means
to the Australian public, to individuals,
to actual people.
Yeah, that's right.
Most of us are not going to earn not going to have 140 million in our lifetime.
Yeah, Yeah. I mean, in my mind as well, when people hear numbers like that, and especially when they hear that a number like that has been mismanaged, they do tend to think about, 140 million is 140 Australian families living pretty for the rest of their lives, you know what I mean? In terms of the way that, what that money means to the average person.
Could have done with
it. What that money means to the average person. So that is a significant amount of the public's labour and efforts in the jobs that they work to
and I I don't mind, well, I have an ambivalent relationship with tax, I think that I want functional schools, I want functional hospitals, someone needs to build the roads that, we all drive on. We need this kind of stuff. I can't run a hospital by myself. I can't run a school by myself. I can't build a road by myself. We need this stuff. So I'm happy to pay money to contribute to this. I don't want to be one of those countries where there are kids starving in the gutters. I've seen that.
Yeah.
So in that perspective, I don't mind paying tax. If I pay my tax, bloody well want you to use it properly.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's two totally, they're totally separate issues. I mean, yeah, it's as you say, it's a matter of what the Australian public should expect from their politicians, and what our measure of what it, when we talk about integrity and when we talk about someone acting responsibly, what that means and how it's drifted from the past. So I think that's fairly clear. Just now, and this will probably be the last topic that we touch on, so that we're not sitting here, because I can see we'll do more of these. So, but for the time being, let's close on this one. I just wanted to touch on your, let's call it your home ground, which is health. The coronavirus pandemic. Obviously, there's some people who think that we're coming out the back end of a tunnel. Are we coming out the back end of a tunnel?
Look, I think we have been incredibly lucky, both fortunate but mostly lucky. We're an island away from everywhere. Peter Dutton's decision fairly early on to quarantine incoming travellers from China, I think, was really helpful in slowing things up. I think a whole series of decisions that we made after that could have been better. I was working in part of the system in the ACT in the second year, and just at a local level, no one had sort of quite sorted out in public health. So when you've got someone like a little family isolating at home, and then one parent gets it and they're really sick with the coronavirus, and then the other parent gets it, so you've got two parents who are really sick with the coronavirus and they're isolating, and they've got the kids, and so what are we going to do with the kids? All of the...
There wasn't a sort of basic plan for the obvious problems, which were...
Well, and this is the thing, this sort of touches to some of those, those kind of leftish, slightly woke questions about diversity.
Yeah.
If your entire political staff are aged under the age of 20, I was a little... Brittany Hickens at the press club, who advised in her closing comments when someone asked, what could be better, and she said, well, sure, it'd be good if political staffers had a bit of an induction when they came into the job. And I'm sort of thinking, basic HR principles or something. And she went on to say that the guy who's in the Defence Minister's office, who's oversighting as a political staffer the purchase of the fighter jets, is under 30 and has no military experience or aviation experience. So
small problem.
So if you employ a series of political staffers and policy people to come up with the decisions, and they're hanging out and they're going to the public bar in Monaca or down, is Monaca Kingston? Which one's public?
Monaca.
It's Monaca. And, they're there 5 nights a week until 11, and then they're back in the office, and they don't have kids. It just doesn't occur to them that kids are a thing.
Yeah.
We need some spectrum. Are we nearly out the end of it? I think there's likely to be another couple of variants before we, things start to settle down. I think we've been incredibly fortunate at this point in history. And then we could talk about science. That's another topic we have to address.
Yeah, but
we were able to. That we're at a time where we were able to get the vaccines. People are concerned about the vaccine efficacy and does it actually work. Hong Kong's currently having a period at the moment where I think they're running at 1,000 deaths a day because they didn't manage to get their vaccinations out. So it's like 60% of the population only are vaccinated with 2 shots, and they're currently running at 1,000 a day.
Okay, right.
The vaccine has been pretty damn good.
It seems,
and I think, and then the other thing is it's clear that there is the possibility for some long-term effects from this virus. And
in what regard? If to one's personal health?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in terms of the immediate health effects, there's long COVID syndromes, which Are they a genuine medical illness? Well, probably yes, because Imperial College in London has managed to map the antibody profile. That means if you've got this, you've got long COVID. So, that seems to wipe 20% of the people who get it out for, 18 months, 2 years. And, there's a whole lot of viruses that have really long-term complications that we don't really think about. There's the post-polio syndromes, which we never see now because we don't get polio. There's a whole series of illnesses of late middle age which are associated with measles, Paget's disease. So I think the virus clearly infects multiple organs, and I think it's likely that we'll end up with a continuing load from that.
Yeah. On that note that you've just touched on there, and the fact that when you're talking about coronavirus and we talk about complicated subjects, especially when we're talking about viruses interacting with complex biology and all the rest of it, I think some people will get a little bit burnt out by, or have been a little bit burnt out by this topic, because often people will discuss this topic as though they are an all-knowing authority about a subject which is very complicated. Obviously,
Mate, I went to Phillip College as a public school, and somehow, heading up mistake or something, I ended up in the back row of medicine at Sydney Uni, and
just by chance,
surrounded by all of these GPS public school guys, and I wasn't them, and obviously I was out of my depth, and so I'm really comfortable. I don't know what the answer is.
Well, I think that's refreshing. I honestly think that's refreshing.
In fact, if you ask a lot of people who sound like they know the answer, what the answer is, they don't know either.
I think that's part of what causes this tiredness in people on this subject, is because it would be fine if there was a degree of ambiguity and everyone was sort of saying, well, we know this for sure, but there's this whole area that we're not really sure about. But instead you have, people on all sides of this argument are just being polarized further and further into states where they're saying that things are a certain way from the top to the tail, and that's the way it is. Anything that you hear from anyone else is untrue, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And then as a result, it creates this environment that is polarized. Do you think that, coronavirus is one thing, but do you think in general Australians are becoming more polarized in their opinions? Is the same thing true in our politics? Is there a change that needs to happen where people need to become more negotiable? Do we need to become less irate? What is that effect? Can you comment on that? For example, just to give you something maybe to direct that thought. Mismanagement of.
I think the way that our politics is presented indicates. So one of the things that's been in the media recently has been the death of the Labor Senator Kimberley Kitchen, and there have been a series of things about that. But one of them is that it was clear that she had what appear to have been warm collaborative relationships across Parliament. Pauline Hanson said, I'm really going to miss her.
Yeah.
But I don't think that would have been presented if she hadn't died. What the media presents is sort of factionalised, aggressive bulldogness.
Yeah.
And I don't know to what extent that reflects the reality of Parliament. But I think we would be better served by a more collaborative approach in most areas.
Yeah, and I think people would appreciate hearing you say that, rather than necessarily immediately being combative and being unable to speak on topics which are charged for most people. That being said, I just wanted to stay on coronavirus as we finish up here. There has been to some degree a narrative about the mismanagement of COVID, the federal level handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Do you have anything to, because obviously people would be interested in your perspective, because you're a well-respected doctor.
So the things that we're talking about, the things where I see problems touch into the same stuff that we've already spoken to. Very limited capacity to make any sort of forward-looking or strategic plan. So there's quite a bit of media commentary, or commentary in the media, that from September last year, maybe the year, from the September, AMA was writing to the feds going, we need some clarification on the rat testing. We're going to need availability of that. And the sense that we were going to need to live with COVID, I'd wondered initially if we could lock it out. And
you thought that might be a possibility?
It was certainly a possibility. Yeah. And it became clear once the Ruby Princess and New South Wales kicked off that we were not really going to be able to achieve that. And in fact, I think it's probably not achievable unless you're living in a totalitarian state. So
most likely, yeah.
New Zealand tried really hard. They're isolated. They had a lot of community compliance and they didn't manage to lock it out. The Chinese can weld people into their buildings because the state's most important.
Not can, did.
Yes.
Did.
Did well. Yeah. And so if you've got that level of state control, it may be possible to run with a zero tolerance, a zero COVID elimination policy, but we're not that kind of a society. Yeah. So once we're not that kind of society, we're going to have to live with COVID, and I agree that we're going to have to work out how to live with COVID. But producing a pamphlet and a 2-slide doc PowerPoint and announcing that this is how we're going to live with COVID is not
sufficient.
No, it's not. It's a thought bubble.
Yeah.
It's not a strategy. It doesn't specify how or when, even at the moment. So I know a couple of in-laws have both had COVID. As far as I can see, once one of you in the house has got the Omicron, then probably everybody else will get it.
So I've read as well, it's almost guaranteed.
What the guidelines continue to say, they don't distinguish between the person in the house who got the COVID and is now better, and the person in the house who's still within their isolation period. They just say that if you're living in a house with someone with COVID, then you need to be isolating. But if you've had COVID, then you can just go out. Once you're past the thing...
The infectious stage.
Yeah, that's right. There's no need for you to be isolating in terms of infection. So, but this, even at this level, this failure to kind of make clear for people.
Yeah.
Because, we're talking about, there have been 2 sets of people in my that I know, friends and family in the last sort of month where this issue's come up. And, one lot of them's tertiary educated, the other lot, in fact, they're both tertiary educated, wanting to do the right thing, and they couldn't find out what it was that they were supposed to do. The information's not there.
Yeah, because I think it has really highlighted that there is, I don't know if it's the federal government's fault. I'm not sure whose fault it is. But there was clearly a failure to ensure the clear flow of information through this whole... It
seems to me to be a sort of general failing of responsibility. One of the markers for me was Paul Kelly's the Chief Health Officer, or was the Chief. I don't know if he's been replaced or if he's still the Chief Health Officer. I should check. But in the first wind out of the thing, Norman Swan, who is a medical journalist with a staff of 3, was providing a coronavirus update daily of 10 minutes, responding to queries from the website. And I saw a presentation by Paul Kelly where he announced that the Department of Health had managed to run one webinar for professionals that had been attended by about 1,000 people. He thought it had gone pretty well, and they thought they might do another one.
Yeah.
No grasp of what is...
So, which is obviously not enough. Yeah.
Well, what's the government supposed to do? What do we want our government to do? Do we want it to have expertise and authority to be able to communicate and coordinate stuff? Or do we want it to collect some taxes to fund the purchase of a nuclear submarine?
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, I know what I want.
Yeah. So
functional hospitals.
Yeah.
Functional education system.
I think that's
functional welfare net.
Yeah. Okay. Well, rather than digging further into things, we'll leave other topics for these sessions. I enjoyed this. I hope to do this again. I hope you didn't think it was too long. Was it all right?
It's fine by me.
And we'll see as when people watch these back, maybe they're going to be more hungry for information.
Sure.
We'll see how it goes. But either way, it was a pleasure talking to you. I look forward to the next one, and thanks for clarifying and helping us learn a little bit more about you, as a person too.
Well, thank you, George. It's been fun.
Okay, until next time.
Yep.